Welcome to this segment from the Europe's Innovation Gap: Why the EU Trails the US and East Asia in Tech series. To make this deep dive more accessible, I've broken the full video into smaller, focused chapters. If you're interested in the full story, from overregulation to the rise of unicorn startups, you can find the complete video on my channel. Today, we are talking about Chapter 4: Cultural, Legal, and Historical Factors. Does Europe's cautious mindset hold back innovation? In this chapter, we'll look at how culture and law shape the tech landscape.
Cultural, legal, and historical factors, the European mindset.
Regulations and money are big pieces of the puzzle, but underlying them are cultural and historical currents that shape how innovation happens or doesn't happen in Europe. Let's explore some of these less tangible but powerful factors: risk aversion and fear of failure. Culturally, many European societies have tended to be more risk-averse compared to the American go-for-it attitude. Taking big entrepreneurial risks hasn't always been celebrated. In some countries, failure can carry a stigma. A failed business might mark you as irresponsible, whereas in Silicon Valley, failing is almost a badge of honor, experience for the next venture. As one analysis bluntly put it, quote, "Europe is drowning in risk aversion," close quote, and the precautionary mindset can lead to quote-unquote self-inflicted harm by rejecting new innovations out of fear. That may be hyperbole, but indeed the social safety net and stable career paths in Europe, which are positives in many ways, also mean fewer people feel the urge to drop everything to found a startup. A survey by the European Commission once found fewer young Europeans aspired to start a business than their American or Chinese counterparts, preferring secure employment. Bureaucracy and red tape. It's not just at the EU policy level. At almost every level, bureaucracy in Europe can slow things down. Whether it's registering a company, getting permits, or accessing research funding, there are often layers of process. Some of this comes from Europe's desire for consensus and legal thoroughness. Again, not bad aims. But the result is a slower pace. A humorous but telling example. It's joked that if a new technology like CRISPR or drones emerges, the US will patent it, China will copy it, and Europe will regulate it, taking its time to consult all stakeholders. By the time everyone is on board, others have sprinted ahead. Labour laws and cost of failure. European labour protections are among the strongest in the world. It's hard to fire employees in many EU countries without significant compensation and process. This is socially commendable, but from an innovation standpoint, it can make companies less agile. If a project fails in the US, a company might pivot and let some staff go to reallocate resources swiftly. In Europe, that failure cleanup is much costlier. In fact, the cost of restructuring or laying off R&D teams in Europe can be astronomical, on the order of Euro 200,000 per person in severance and related costs, up to Euro 250k in Germany, a cost that does not exist in the United States, China, or India. This startling figure from tech veterans Gilles Babinet and Olivier Coste illustrates why European firms might be hesitant to attempt bold, experimental projects. If 4 out of 5 such projects fail, typical in high tech, the cleanup cost in Europe is prohibitive. So companies play it safe with more incremental development that won't require layoffs if it flops. In a sense, labour laws unintentionally discourage the fail-fast innovation ethos, the precautionary principle in society. We discussed the regulatory embodiment of this principle, but it's also a broader mindset. Europeans often demand a high degree of certainty about safety and ethics before embracing new tech. Genetically modified foods, for instance, faced heavy opposition and regulation in Europe, slowing biotech innovation in agriculture. Nuclear energy is largely shunned in some countries due to perceived risks, which has knock-on effects for nuclear research. Meanwhile, countries like South Korea or the US might charge ahead on certain tech, with some risk, and deal with consequences if they come. This is a philosophical difference. Europe prioritizes avoiding worst-case scenarios, whereas the US often focuses on enabling best-case scenarios. The result can be slower adoption of disruptive technologies in Europe. Fragmented markets and languages. Europe's diversity is its pride, but from a market perspective, it's a challenge. A startup scaling in the US can reach 300+ million people with one language and set of laws. In Europe, to reach 300 million people, you likely have to navigate a dozen languages and regulatory regimes. Even within the EU single market, certain industries, like digital services, still face fragmentation. Differing consumer preferences, standards, or implementation of EU directives. This fragmentation not only affects startups, as mentioned, but also R&D collaboration. For example, the difficulty of cross-border data sharing, each country's privacy authority interpreting GDPR slightly differently, can hamper pan-European AI research. It has been said that Europe lacks a single innovation market. In fact, a recent high-level report called for creating a fifth freedom in Europe: the free movement of knowledge, innovation, and researchers across borders, to mirror the freedoms of goods, people, services, and capital. The idea is to tear down the internal barriers so a researcher in Greece can easily collaborate and commercialize an idea with a company in Germany, etc. Until that happens, many innovators find the US or China's large homogeneous markets more attractive for scaling new products. Education and industry. Disconnect. Europe boasts excellent education and scientific training. Many countries have free or low-cost universities producing skilled graduates. Paradoxically, though, there's often a gap in entrepreneurial education and industry-relevant skills. European universities historically haven't spun off startups at the rate of Stanford or MIT, though that is changing slowly. Culturally, a PhD in Europe might aim for a stable research career rather than a garage startup. The European Commission noted, quote, "limited integration of researchers in networks that also include the private sector and venture capital," close quote. This can make it harder to turn lab results into a business. Additionally, some employers complain of skill mismatches. Tech companies not finding the specialized talent they need, suggesting an updating of training is needed. Historical legacy of industrial success. Europe's past successes might oddly be contributing to present sluggishness. Iconic industries like automotive, aerospace, pharmaceuticals, and banking have long dominated Europe's economy. These incumbents have comfortable positions and often close ties with governments, providing lots of jobs, etc. There may be less pressure or incentive to innovate radically when an industry has been doing well, until an external disruptor comes in. The US had its share of complacent firms too, but the competitive, shareholder-driven environment forced many to adapt or die. Think of IBM's near collapse and revival, or Detroit automakers facing bankruptcy and retooling. In Europe, industrial giants can enjoy more protection, both market and social, that insulates them from upstarts. This can create a general business culture of incrementalism over disruption. Now, none of these cultural factors are absolute. Europe has millions of risk takers, and the US certainly has risk-averse folks too. But on average, these tendencies have shaped an environment where bold entrepreneurial innovation is harder. European startups often joke they had to fly to San Francisco to be taken seriously or to think big. The ecosystem in many EU cities only recently started celebrating startup success as much as, say, becoming a doctor or lawyer, traditional prestigious careers. Let's add a concrete comparative nugget. Bankruptcy laws differ. In the US, Chapter 11 bankruptcy allows companies to restructure and try again, whereas in some European countries, bankruptcy used to be more punitive or procedurally lengthy, which discouraged taking a chance that could lead to personal bankruptcy. Reforms have been made, but attitudes linger. Likewise, stock options, a key tool to lure talent in startups, were historically taxed unfavorably in parts of Europe, making it hard for startups to compensate early employees. The US had a friendlier regime for this, fueling the startup growth by letting employees share in successes and accept lower salary up front. Finally, consider brain drain. Europe has top universities, Oxford, Cambridge, ETH, Zurich, etc., But many of their best graduates in tech and science often move to the US for opportunities. Silicon Valley, with its high salaries and exciting projects, has attracted scores of European engineers and scientists. China and Korea have aggressively lured back their expatriate scientists with big grants, the sea turtle phenomenon in China. Europe has struggled to keep its brightest at home or to attract as many global talents in the tech sector. When a European AI researcher can triple their salary at a US tech firm, it's tough for a European university or startup to compete. This talent flow further widens the innovation gap. All these factors are interwoven with the regulatory and financial issues we discussed. For example, risk aversion fuels precautionary regulations. Bureaucracy and fragmentation lead to reliance on public funding. The success of old industries can breed complacency in policy. Think tanks have been pointing out these issues for years. Quote, a European culture that is more reluctant to take risks, fragmentation of the market, insufficient capital, regulations harmful to innovation, competition policy that weakens European champions. All these causes are valid, close quote. The frustrating part is, as that quote notes, Europe has been aware of these issues for decades, yet struggles to overcome them. Efforts at reform often meet inertia or political resistance. Nobody wants less safety or to cut worker protections, understandably. However, recognizing these cultural and historical challenges is the first step to addressing them. It means Europe might need not just policy tweaks, but a mindset shift, embracing a bit more risk, celebrating entrepreneurs, and tolerating the messy trial and error that innovation requires. In summary, Europe's innovation challenges aren't just about money or laws, they're about mindset and systems. Change is happening. Today's European youth are more entrepreneurial than their parents, startup scenes are blossoming. But overcoming deep-rooted attitudes takes time. The good news is that culture can evolve, especially if success stories emerge to inspire change. For instance, the rise of a Spotify or a BioNTech can shift perceptions about what's possible in Europe. If you found this chapter interesting, consider watching the full deep dive, where I cover everything from Europe's startup gap to case studies comparing the EU, US, and Asia. You'll find the link in the description. And hey, if you like this kind of content, smash that like button, subscribe for more deep dives, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Cheers, and see you in the next one.